readers to face through connections to land and community, to the ideological underpinnings of home, the challenges of today. So just as with her novels for adults, Erdrich's novels for children form a historical and nostalgic web of narratives set from contact through the 20th century. Her Birchbark House series works to recover that part of history when the Anishinaabe, under extreme pressure from European settlers, left their beloved homelands on and around Lake Superior and journeyed west. Erdrich's family has traced their early history to Madeline Island in northern Wisconsin, and the series is predicated on the loss of and yearning for that original home, which it seeks and reconstructs through myriad historical details and contexts. Set in the 1840s, the Birchbark House and its sequels, The Game of Silence and The Porcupine Year, tell the story of Omakayas from age 7 into her young womanhood, as her community is forced to leave Madeline Island. The fourth novel in the series, and the most recent one, Chickadee, begins the narrative of Omakayas' children, twin boys that are 8 in the first one, Chickadee and Macoons, as the family keeps moving further west toward their final destination on the Great Plains of Minnesota and the Dakotas. Tonight I'm going to concentrate on the first of these novels for a bit. The Birchbark House begins with a prologue that gestures toward the pressures of colonization that will drive these people from their home. A group of white and mixed blood fur traders stop at a small island community to pick up furs from the Anishinaabe community and find everyone dead from smallpox except for a baby girl. Afraid of the disease and the dead, they cravenly turn away and leave the child. But she's then saved by one of the traders' wives, a woman named Old Tallow, who rescues and nurses her to health and then gives her to a loving family. That child is Omakayas, and she is the narrative center of the first 3 novels in this series. Her name means little frog, given because her first step was a hop, and readers meet her at age 7 when she is out harvesting birch bark with her Nokomis. And this is a quote, an extended quote worth reading, certainly. Just like her namesake, Omakayas now stared long at the silky patch of bog before she gathered herself and jumped. And this would be to read to a little kid. I need to read it to Arwen in about a year, I think. One hummock, safety. Omakayas sprang wide again. This time she landed on the very tip-top of a pointed old stump. She balanced there, looking all around. The lagoon water moved in sparkling crescents. Thick swales of swamp grass rippled. Mud turtles napped in the sun. The world was so calm that Omakayas could hear herself blink. Only the sweet call of a solitary white-throated sparrow pierced the cool of the woods beyond. All of a sudden, Grandma yelled, "I found it!" Startled, Omakayas slipped and spun her arms in wheels. She teetered, but somehow kept her balance. 2 big skipping hops, another leap, and she was on dry land. End quote. Erdrich thus constructs her little frog as a bridging character, able to balance between the natural world to which she is deeply attached and the socio-cultural milieu of her community. The narrative also balances her at a pivotal turning point in First Nations history. She will come of age just as her people are forced to begin their journey west. Peterson argues that historical novels by minority writers often, I quote, attempt to intervene in the official version of American history and identity by bringing to consciousness counter-histories that trouble the conventional narrative. Erdrich's young readers are quickly swept into Omakayas' worldview as she offers the details of her daily life. Her love for her parents, her fights with her older sister and annoying little brother, her adoration for her baby brother. Not until after she saves her family during a smallpox outbreak does Omakayas learn that she is adopted, that she survived the disease that killed her entire community, and that Old Tallow brought her to live with Nokomis, Mama, Day, Angeline, Pinch, and baby Niwo. Erdrich keeps emotional engagement high. Young readers can easily relate to Omakayas' despair over all the chores she must do, particularly the despised hide preparation. Her frustrations with her bossy big sister and mischievous little brother. And they will mourn with her when the beloved toddler Niwo dies during the smallpox epidemic. They will also be entranced by Omakayas' interactions with the natural world, particularly her pet crow, and the twin bear cubs she repeatedly encounters. And actually Erdrich did these illustrations herself. These cubs eventually teach her how to hear nature, to learn what plants and animals have to teach her about healing. They prepare her for an especially challenging adulthood as she helps her community through the trials of migration. The move of the Ojibwe Nation west might not have been the Trail of Tears, but it was a Trail of Tears nonetheless. Moreover, this series, as invested in the emotive force of nostalgia as it might be, is one of those stories of presence, as Gerald Visner describes them. Erdrich's Birch Bark House stories are thus acts of remembrance, of history, of people, of self, as they position the Anishinaabe through Omakayas at a pivotal moment, a moment of great loss, a moment that invokes nostalgia. Still, I would argue that the story of Omakayas and the removal of her people offer nostalgia as a defense against loss, nostalgia as a reclamation of national history and identity. I'll explain further as I conclude where I began with the Range Eternal. This story of the wood stove with its elusive name and a child's memories. I quote, "On cold winter days in the Turtle Mountains, I helped Mama cook soup on our wood stove, the Range Eternal, the warm heart of the house." This little girl narrator learns to write by tracing those letters in the air, and she sleeps safe and warm facing the fire as it died down behind the glass. However, the family's range is also its nation's historical range. And this child enters fully into that history in a movement that is both nostalgia and reclamation. I quote, "I looked through its doors into pictures of long ago, saw the range of the buffalo who once covered the plains of North Dakota so thickly that they grazed from horizon to horizon. I ran the deer range. I galloped the range of horses. I flew the sky, the range of herons, of cranes, hawks, and eagles. I saw the range eternal." After the warmth it provides and sustenance it helps prepare, the range is removed when electricity comes to the Turtle Mountain Reserve. However, the little girl misses the stove. She's nostalgic for it, noting there is no center to the kitchen. The story ends as the narrator, now married and a mother, longs for a center of true warmth and finds the Range Eternal, here it is discarded, in an antique store. It was not until I passed the broad window of a store that sold old things that I knew what I missed, the Range Eternal. At that moment, this picture book nostalgically engages with history without allowing it to become only a record of loss. Ladino points out that nostalgia is experienced by an individual is rarely, if ever, just personal. Like all emotions, it responds to and gestures towards broader contexts. Looking backward becomes looking forward as Erdrich turns nostalgic rememberings into a methodology of resistance. The Range Eternal ends with a moment of restoration as the narrator gathers her family around the stove she has brought home. I watch the flames pull shadows down the walls. I teach my son to enter the pictures the way I used to. Okay, this is from Missing the Stove. She's finding the stove. Okay. I show my husband and son how the animals race back and forth across the wall to the horizon beneath a deep and darkening sky. I keep the fire going. Together we see again the old range, the vast range, the living range restored. In this imaginative reconstruction of the past, Erdrich looks both backward to the open plain and Ojibwe sovereignty and ahead to urban native cultural survival. Since this talk is about looking forward and looking backward and making connections, I'll go back to where I began, to my education in Native Studies and my experience at the Little Red River School. They connected to inspire my work as researcher and teacher. What I didn't tell you is that every course I took for that minor in Native Studies was a distance education course. My courses were delivered through lectures on closed-circuit television, through conference call discussions, through printed course packages and textbooks, and through the occasional real live instructor who drove to Melfort or Prince Albert to deliver course content. And this brings me to the last set of connections I want to talk about tonight. A new initiative that will see Augustana and 3 other COPLAC institutions were part of it, the consortium of public liberal arts colleges. And we're going to be sharing Native Studies programming over the next 3 years. We have a grant. So this winter, Janet will be delivering electronically a course on Indigenous ways of knowing, and next fall I will be delivering a course on Native children's literature through distance education, because everything comes back to the center. Just as the research I presented tonight weaves together my work on children's and Indigenous literatures, this course will connect many parts of my history as a teacher, scholar, librarian. I look forward to the ways in which will allow me to connect with students on our campus, on students at other COPLAC institutions, and hopefully with students at Maskwacis and First Nations beyond. Thank you so much for sharing this with me.
Any mention of urbanization in urban settings. Are those urban settings just an absence or some sort of absent presence?
Well, no, the kids in Grandmother's Pigeon, that's an urban setting as well. So there are those. There are more. Just looking for the, and actually Richard Van Kamp's book is orality put in contemporary urban setting. So they're there. It's yes. Brian.
So I had a question about nostalgia and the way nostalgia is figured in contemporary Indigenous literature for youth. You talked about nostalgia as an act of recreation and reclamation, and the way that basically it is a strategy of pushback against the negative and detrimental effects of colonization and colonialism. And I was just wondering, where does language figure into this? Are there efforts to reclaim Indigenous languages in?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question. There was one book I couldn't get to, and it's remarkable. This is Piscine Finds Her Niskanou. This is a project done by the University of Winnipeg. So with an Indigenous storyteller, William Dumas, and all of the Rocky Cree words are here, they're explained. So there are these big, beautiful, amazing watercolors done by Leonard Paul, who is an East Coast First Nations man. But then you have all of this. So language really matters in this one. In Erdrich, who has been spending the last 25 years or so, as she's been turning out an amazing catalog of books for children and adults, has been trying to learn Ojibwe Moan, so more and more that language is featuring in her books for children and adults. So yes, yes, it matters. It has to matter, and you have to have the words. So this, I mean, even in something that's extremely accessible, like fire dancers, to call, you know, there's going to be a little glossary with the explanations for grandmother and grandfather, and you're going to have names like Fasa, understanding that it doesn't sound like that in this case, Chippewa.
I wanted to say thank you. Such a beautiful lecture. This is really going to sit with, I think, a lot of people. Certainly with me, thank you. I was thinking about what Lydia said about the brain and trauma, and she was talking about the Holocaust and then it being revisited on subsequent generations. And thinking about your comment about 7 generations to healing. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts around the literature being part of that healing journey and what Native people and First Nations people are saying and what you see.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clearly become Nicola Campbell's project to become one of those generations pushing toward the full healing process. But in Loyer's book, because he absolutely refuses to set, and here's a grizzly bear scene, he absolutely refuses to set any of this in the residential school system. He completely bypasses that until you get to the end, and he gives you his history. So we've got a nice little biography here with family pictures that certainly tells the story for children that this family was devastated by the residential school system, and yet Loyer can look backwards past that and then forward, I think, with The Flying Owl. So I think that this body of work sets that healing continuum on its way. Lars.
In a somewhat similar vein, and I'm kind of struck by the absence, I guess, of, in a discussion in this case of residential schools, the role of faith and some of the contradictions and the tensions that emerge between faith in residential schools and faith either from a standpoint of nostalgia or simply from a standpoint of indigeneity in these stories.
Well, I think that there's the spiritual tradition is relevant in every. I mean, this is Fire Dancers is a ritual dance, putting this grandmother and granddaughter in touch with the ancestors. The repeated offerings of tobacco, the moments of reflection and meditation and connection. I mean, when those two children in Shinji's canoe and Chichi Edko pause to see their place, I don't think you get any more faith-based than that. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Bill.
So I was wondering if you were, are you sticking to North American indigeneity, Canadian primarily? Or?
Well, you know, when I first started imagining what the grant proposal would look like, I was thinking, because the pattern tends to be in the area right now, as Claire Bradford has said it, to circle the globe. But I kind of decided that borders are arbitrary, but oceans aren't. I'm sticking to North America. Yeah. Possibly, I made some, through the journal I was editing, I made some good connections with Mexican scholars of children's lit, and maybe there'll be some place for collaboration. There has to be something written by Mayan people for kids about their oral traditions and their histories. So, but right now, yeah, definitely. I mean, Thomas King has that great story called Borders, where the Blackfoot woman sits at the Canadian border. She can't get into the States because they say, "What's your nationality?" And she says, "Blackfoot." And so she sits there, and the story is, actually, I think, a kid's story, because the kid telling the story is about 8 years old, and he's absolutely mortified by his mother and her ridiculous behavior. And they finally, she wears them down, and they let her go through being Blackfoot and not Canadian or American or any of that. So yeah, I'm going with arbitrary borders, but not arbitrary oceans. I'm sticking to this side of the pond. Jess?
Going back to the healing again, with it being children's literature, there could be a presumption that it's written for the children, but dealing with the nostalgia, is there a difference between the children's books written as healing for the author versus those by the author for children of their age?
You've lost me.
Like, when we were talking about children's literature for the project Reading Together, we dealt with whether authors are writing to teenagers about teenagers, or kind of a healing for themselves as writers.
I think both. I mean, with the authors that Jessica made me do a directed reading that traumatized me still. And I think that as therapeutic as those books were for those authors, I mean, for Loyer, certainly, he needed to tell this story, and he needed to tell it in a way that was, I think, incredibly positive and proactive and resistant, all the good stuff. Yes, Jessica and I looked at rape narratives and narratives about girls who cut themselves. Really awesome. No, I think I'm done. Thank you. I guess there's a reception. Yeah.